Today, we're diving into the life of a true enigma from Bengal, a mystic, a poet, and really, a humanist who went by the name Lalon Shah. They called him the Emperor of Baul music. His life was just as mysterious as his songs, which talk about a kind of truth you don't find in scriptures, but inside the human soul itself.
So, who was this guy, really? Well, that's the thing. He was a man with no fixed religion, no caste. His story is this incredible mix of history and, well, legend. His own identity was a question he spent his whole life answering, not with simple facts, but with this deep philosophy that he wove into his music.
And this line right here, this is the heart of it all. This is his central metaphor. He saw the human body as a kind of cage, and the soul, or the divine spark, whatever you want to call it, as an unknown bird, just flitting around inside. It's a beautiful idea, and it pretty much captures his entire search for the divine within ourselves. But to really get it, we need to understand the journey that made him who he was.
To understand the philosopher, you first have to understand the man. And to do that, we have to talk about the one journey that completely shattered his world, only to rebuild it into something entirely new.
Okay, so what do we actually know? Historically, we're pretty sure he was born around 1774 in what was then undivided Bengal. His exact birthplace is still up for debate, but he spent most of his very, very long life in a village called Chiria in Kushtia. And that village became the epicenter of his whole spiritual movement.
This quote, wow, it just gets right to the core of his identity, doesn't it? Whenever people would press him, what's your religion, what's your caste, this was his answer. He just completely rejected the labels that are designed to divide people, basically arguing that our shared humanity is the only identity that really matters.
But this radical way of thinking didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was forged in a crucible of sickness, of abandonment, and what you could really only describe as a near-death experience.
So, picture this. Lalon, as a young man, sets out on a pilgrimage, a pretty common spiritual journey at the time. But this trip was about to take a turn that was anything but common.
On the journey, disaster strikes. He contracts smallpox, which back then was a devastating, often fatal disease. And his condition just got worse and worse, so much so that his companions completely lost hope.
Believing he was dead, his friends did what they thought was right. They performed what they thought were his last rites and set his body adrift on the Kalaganga River. I mean, can you imagine? That's the ultimate abandonment. Cast out from your friends, your past, your entire life as you knew it.
But here's the crazy part. The river that was supposed to be his grave, it ended up being his cradle. This moment of death led directly to his rebirth, both physically and, more importantly, spiritually.
Floating downstream, just barely clinging to life, he was found. He was rescued by a man named Siraj Sai. And Siraj Sai wasn't just some random savior. He would become Lalon's guru, his spiritual teacher and his guide.
So, under his new mentor's care, Lalon didn't just recover his health. This was a complete spiritual awakening. He shed his old identity, his old name, everything. He was reborn as the Lalon we know today, a man who belonged to no single religion or caste, but was dedicated to this idea of a universal humanity.
So what did this new Lalon believe? Well, his transformation led him to a philosophy that was radical, incredibly simple, and just profound. And at its heart was one core idea.
And that idea is called Deho Toto, or the philosophy of the body. Lalon basically argued that searching for God in some external temple or mosque was a total mistake. For him, the divine wasn't out there somewhere, it was right here inside of us. The human body itself was the ultimate temple, the living vessel of that unknown bird. It's an idea he weaves into almost all his songs.
And that core belief is what gave rise to his radical humanism. It's why he was secular. Taking wisdom from both Hindu and Islamic traditions, but not being boxed in by either one. It's why he preached nonviolence. And as we've seen, it's why he so fiercely rejected the caste system or any social structure that said one person was better than another.
And the power of these ideas was just undeniable. His philosophy so deeply moved the great poet and Nobel laureate Rabindranath Tagore that Tagore became one of the very first people to collect and preserve Lalon's songs. He helped introduce Lalon's radical humanism to the entire world.
So how is this mystic remembered today? Well, more than a century after his death, Lalon's presence is felt, I'd say, more strongly than ever. Not in old texts, but in the living, breathing tradition of his music.
His life was just unbelievably long and impactful. Born in 1774, he survives this near-fatal disease, spends decades composing and teaching, and then passes away in 1890 at the incredible age of 116. He left behind a legacy that would just echo for generations.
And that legacy is mostly a musical one. Get this, he never actually wrote any of his songs down himself. But his followers, they've managed to preserve over 2,000 of them. 2,000! And each one is like a little philosophical lesson, a spiritual question, and a piece of music all rolled into one.
This line right here might just be the best summary of his entire philosophy. For Lalon, the path to becoming golden, achieving enlightenment, wasn't about rituals or dogma. It was about serving and loving other human beings. To see the divine in other people was to find it in yourself.
And so that brings us back to where we started, by turning his big question back to you. Lalon spent his whole life searching for that unknown bird, that spark of the divine self inside the cage of the body. And his philosophy is basically an invitation for all of us to do the same. So, who is the unknown bird in your cage?